everybody, back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm here today with Miss Beverly Bell, an award winner, Pulitzer Prize winner, author, and most importantly, a Kentuckian who has written a book about the murder of Marion Miley. We're glad to have Miss Beverly on here for our Kentucky Spotlight. Miss Beverly, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you. I would love to claim a Pulitzer, but I do not have that. I have won other awards, but thank you very much. I'm happy to be on, and I'm glad that we finally able to get this together.
Okay, well, yes, a great book, a great story, a Kentucky story even at that, and I would say majority of Kentuckians, this is going right over their head. They've not even heard of Marion Miley, how would you describe her? You're the one who knows the most about her. How would you describe her overall, her life, her influence even as well?
Sure. Well, Marion was a leading American golfer beginning in about the mid-1930s. She was part of actually a group of women in the United States who elevated the game of golf throughout this country and pretty much kind of laid the foundation for what would become professional golf in the 1940s. She had many abilities and talents. Golf was only one of them. She was a horsewoman. She was a writer. She played the piano, and so she had all these things coming together, and was then tragically murdered when she was 27 years old at the Lexington, Kentucky Country Club. And it was a story that made the front page of the New York Times above the fold. It actually made it in papers not only throughout this country, but throughout the world, because she was that well known as an amateur golfer.
A very, I guess for the time, a very influential woman even at the time, and I don't know a lot of golf history. She paved the way, I would assume, for the women's, is it Cup, World Tour? Well,
it was at that time, they didn't really have a professional women's golf tour the way we know it today. Everything was about the amateur game. But they had a very competitive sort of agenda of tournaments. Most of those centered in the South just because of weather, but they were played all over the United States. And it's a really interesting time for golf, I would say, because most people, even if they're not a golfer, they've heard of Bobby Jones, and he was the lead amateur player, and he decided to retire in 1930. So what that caused was kind of a gap, where interest in the men's game went down, and so you had these women come, and they were playing at a high level, and it was the 1930s, which was also the Depression. And there wasn't a lot of money. So people really used going to these amateur events as, one of the leisure activities, one of the fun things that they could do, and, watch these women compete. So it was just a really unique time. What I often like to say, though, about this book and about her story is, yes, golf is obviously an important part, but this is a compelling story all on its own. Yes. You mentioned about her being one of the, leading kind of, we would call her, today influencers, And she certainly, was that, and, so this was a story that had a lot more to do than just, golf. Everybody likes a compelling story, something that makes you, think, or, have additional questions or just sort of get wrapped up in it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really what happens with this story. Because ultimately, it's a story of loss. When somebody who you love is taken so, suddenly and so
unexpectedly.
Yes.
Yeah, tragically. Gosh.
And, how do you deal with that?
Mm-hmm.
She was only 27 when she was murdered. She's murdered in a country club, for goodness sakes. It just doesn't, you kind of just can't wrap your head around it because it just seems so unlikely.
Yeah.
And so, I think that was, part of it, and part of why this story was reported all over the world. And then 10 weeks later or 9 weeks later, the United States is attacked at Pearl Harbor before
Mm-hmm.
World War II. And her story just fell off.
Disappears,
just disappeared because for the next 4 years, everything was rightfully about the war effort.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, people just wanted to move on with their lives.
Yeah.
Again, you sort of understand it.
Yeah. More tragedy and then more death
Mm-hmm.
for people. It kind of would happen. I guess if you were saying her influence, she would definitely have a TikTok account, I guess, if she was allowed.
You know what? I feel certain of that. And, I think a good way to look at it is, what were you doing when you were, 20 years old?
Mm-hmm.
I know what I was doing, hard at school, just, making my way through everything. And, she was starting to win these significant amateur tournaments. She's getting reported on every day about how she had played. And then it went way beyond that. They would talk about who she was dating and what she was wearing and what she was eating. And it was just, it was very intense scrutiny for somebody so young and a woman. And, she had incredible freedom because of her skill at playing golf.
Yeah.
So she was traveling by herself, all over the country. It's just really interesting when you put it in the context of when she lived, what the constraints were on either younger people or women or both. It's really it really lays bare, how challenging this could have been, but also if you're in your 20s, it feels pretty exciting, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was not that popular when I was in my 20s, for sure. Nobody was caring what I was wearing.
I know. It's like, what? Why wouldn't you? But she was very good at handling all that media pressure.
Yeah, she was definitely, a public figure. And you could even say like an ambassador for Kentucky, even, as being probably one of the most popular people from Kentucky during her time, I would say. As far as golf goes, or at least excluding maybe a governor or something like that, which they aren't always nationally popular anyway.
I would say ambassador is a great way to phrase it. It's funny that you say governor, because she played golf with Happy Chandler. And, you know what I mean? Like, the governor wants to play golf today.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not getting any phone calls like that. But,
Hopefully no one ever calls me to play golf, because it would be embarrassing. My only golf connection is when I was, 15, 16, my older brother, my older cousin, they started wanting to get into golf. And I'm left-handed, so it was like a real, struggle to get left-handed clubs. So I never really got into golf from that point. That was about it. Not the golfer. Well, so my big question is, what kind of got you interested in this story? Where did it? I think, did you cover it before, or just got wind of it? How'd it go?
A combination of both of those things. So when I first learned of this story, it was from my late father-in-law, who is from Lexington. He was a teenager when she was killed, and he also remembered, he knew who she was. He did not play golf, but everybody sort of knew who she was. And when he told me about it, I was just starting to sort of tiptoe into doing some magazine writing. And he said, I've got a great story for you. And he told me the story, and just a very, very little bit of research on my part. And I thought, this is something. And I had never heard of it. You're talking about people who I had never heard of this before. And so at that point, I did write a very small piece for a sports magazine. And then just sort of kept gathering. I was doing other things and writing other things, and just kept collecting. And, one day I just woke up and realized, oh my God, I have a ton of stuff.
I'm going to have to write a book about this.
I have a ton of stuff, It wasn't the easiest thing to start. I had a couple of false starts on the book, but it all comes down. It's the same thing, I think, for either a writer or a reader. Since you teach reading, it, does the story grab you? And you can build a lot of things around it. And, you could say like, oh, well, my brother played golf, but I never took it up. And it doesn't really matter, It doesn't matter your knowledge of that sport. It doesn't matter if you know very little about the 1930s, which, was her main time frame of success on the course. It just doesn't matter about all those things. It's just this, this web that's sort of built around her of, celebrity and being a great athlete, being a great ambassador for the game, which she certainly was. And this, all wrapped up in somebody really young. And yes, she was pretty. And, you're just like, I'm in. I'm in on this story. Let's do it. That's
kind of the thing, whenever you're looking for like history stories, you find one that's captivating and you dive into it, and eventually you come out of the rabbit hole, I guess. And in your case, you came out with a book, so it was good. How long did it take you, or like time frame?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because like I said, I was putting away materials for a long time, but the actual book writing process, I had another job, full-time job. So for about 3.5 years, I got up like 4:15 or 4:30 every morning, and would write a couple of hours before the other job. And like I said, I did that for 3.5 years. And like you said, came out of the rabbit hole on the other side, came out of all that, and finished the book, and got an agent and did all those kind of things.
And then a pandemic happened, of course, right? And you get to release it then.
I have exquisite timing. Exquisite. I'm glad it was my first book experience, because I couldn't. I saw what other authors, how they were reacting. I could tell that this was a very unreal experience in terms of launching a book. But it was the only experience I had. So I think in a way it didn't freak me out as much.
Yeah. Well, you have authors who I'm sure, I guess written many books, and they've never put one out during a pandemic either. So it was unusual. Do you have, since you brought that up, do you have any like other plans writing another book? I mean, about Marion or just in general?
I don't see anything anymore about Marion. I feel satisfied,
Yeah.
with how that came about. I am working on a different new project. Don't really give the details. I'm
Yeah.
kind of hold that really
Yeah. Yeah.
close to the vest because right now it's just a big mess. If you know what I mean, it's just yeah. I know what I want it to look like. Just getting there. I also had completed. I have another unpublished novel that, let's see, I guess that was in the early 2000s, and it did, it was entered in the Tennessee Williams fiction. I think it was called Novel in Progress. And my novel was named one of the semis. I made as far as the semifinals. And but I just kind of put that away. I don't know if I'll bring that back out or look at that, or if you're a writer, you usually just keep writing. And you're doing something, whatever it is. So
which the Murder of Marion Miley, is a USGA Book Award finalist as well.
That is the designation that it's a finalist. Was not selected as the winner, but this book was just this. I always referred to it when it was just me working on it, was my little book, because it's an obscure story, right? Not that many people. And I just thought, well, I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. So for me, any of it is a bonus. I was thrilled when the University Press of Kentucky approached my agent, and they were, really excited about publishing it. They said it was perfect, for them. And so, I'm happy to share the story with anyone, because honestly, I just believe Marion earned it, and she sort of got shortchanged in so many ways.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
I'll ask this question because I've done this a lot. How many hours did you spend reading through newspapers? And too many.
I couldn't even be able. I couldn't even put a guess on that. So much of writing a period piece. And anything can be a period piece when you think about it. I mean, if we were writing something right now for 2010, we'd still have to go put ourselves back and figure out, what the major things. If you're going back to something in the 1930s, a very, very different world. So learning those details, it not only comes from books, but honestly, I think the immediacy comes from newspapers so well. You can learn so much from advertisements in newspapers, in advice sections. Sometimes I would get pulled in, and you may have done this as well. I would just get pulled in reading some of those things. They had nothing to do, and what I was reading had nothing to do. But it was so interesting to me, like FDR, Roosevelt's, wife, Eleanor. She had a column in the paper that would appear regularly, and she was such an active first lady. And you think about, when he was president during the Great Depression as well as the war, and I would go, you just always have these moments of awareness, like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Or, it's fun.
Yeah. It's a great insight to the time that what was going on then. Like we said earlier, nowadays, I guess you would just scroll back through social media and say, okay, this is what these people were thinking. But the newspaper was the key. It was the key to
And radio, and radio at that time. Those were the two.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, we shifted off a little bit. Let's the story of Marion. We talked about her. She was a golfer, a very famous golfer. I believe, was it her father that encouraged her to play golf?
Yes, Fred Miley was a golf pro, mm-hmm. and he worked as a golf pro, from a very early age in terms of moving into that as a career. He was a talented golfer in his own right. And for people who don't really know what a golf pro does, typically at a club, they would give lessons. They would oversee sort of like club tournaments. Fred also competed. He did some tournaments on his own. Of course, we know that other level of golf pro, somebody, like Tiger, who really competes at that highest level. But there's just a whole group of, professional golf
trainers, you could say.
Pros who are working at the club level on a regular basis. And that's what Fred did. Mm-hmm. Fred and Elsie were Marion's parents. Marion was an only child. Mm-hmm. And the best that we can kind of determine, others have looked into this as well, in terms of when she took up the game, she was probably around 12 years old mm-hmm. when he was her first teacher. Yeah. And, there's something really telling about that age. All right, I'm going to quiz you a little bit. Do you know when Tiger first started hitting a golf ball? How old he was?
I don't know. I'm going to guess really young, though. I'm going to say like 4.
I think he was around 2.
2, okay.
And, so his father was certainly introducing him to the game early. And I asked that question because I think parents who are very invested in a sport will typically introduce that same sport to their children or to their mm-hmm. child at a very early age. And to me, that Marion taking up the game at 12 mm-hmm. shows a lot of restraint on Fred's side. I don't know if, there's no way to know the conversations that they had together. So we don't know if Marion had indicated that she was mm-hmm. interested, or maybe Fred was waiting for her to sort of finish growing. Girls typically, stop growing, in height, 12 or 13 or 14, boys have a longer growth spurt. And so, maybe he was waiting for that. I mean, we just simply don't know. But I sort of just give him credit that he wasn't forcing this game on his daughter, on his only child at a really young mm-hmm. age.
Yeah, I think we could probably agree that it was probably more of, if she came to him, he waited and let her approach him, and which is like you said, very, very good restraint. Being a parent myself, it's hard to restrain yours,
especially if you love something. And Fred gets criticism for many things, but I don't think it's warranted in that area. Mm-hmm. Which, if you read the book, some of those other things will come to light, how he was seen, how he was, people continued to see him when I first started asking questions of some people locally, who knew the Mileys or had contact. You would hear some things about Fred that got your attention, that he was a womanizer and drank too frequently. And
Yeah.
so, but at least when it came to his parental responsibilities with Marion and the role he played in her golf game, I think he did a good job.
Well, yeah, and that's that's a really good point that I guess as far as like the time period, there would be people alive that you could talk to that would have had some sort of connection to them, and that would help. I mean, I would think that would be very beneficial as far as like digging in and finding those extra details. On my end, if I'm looking at somebody from 1812, I just gotta go by the newspaper.
Yeah, you're not. Yeah. And that, again, this was many years ago when I first started that research process, mainly for that new magazine article that I wrote. Yeah. But yeah, now there would only be maybe a handful of.
I mean, that'd have to be almost. Well, that'd be 90. 100 to be. Well, so she has this very successful career. When she was murdered, was she still playing golf pretty much regularly?
She was still playing golf when she died in 1941. The difference was a couple of years earlier, Standard Oil had offered her a job. They called it inspecting their service stations. They had gas stations identified as Standard Oil, and I think it was somewhat a kind of a checking, maybe a checklist on different service stations, but it also, I think, had a public relations component. Her job. It was very unusual, though, for an oil company to hire a woman. And so obviously that took part of her time traveling. She in 1 year of there was a mention in a newspaper that Marion had traveled, I think it was 35,000 miles the previous year. And you think about that. You think about that driving. She was driving. So she was always. It seemed like always on the road. But it's really interesting. I also got a copy of her diary from the beginning of 1940 until her death in September 1941, and even though she was not able to keep the same schedule of playing in all those amateur tournaments, it didn't matter where she was playing, who she was playing against. In her diary, she would always put the score. Always. I think that's also very telling.
Yes.
She was very competitive, and she was tracking herself and keeping, just keeping tabs on how her game was going. So at the end of her life, she was really focused on participating in what would be considered those really important amateur tournaments. Those higher level ones. But she had a full-time job, so it's it was definitely frustrating to her. You could see that in some of her diary entries that she would get frustrated about her level of play. But I think she really, really liked earning her own money, and she was really happy when they promoted her and gave her a raise just a short time before her death. So it's just kind of the normal, I guess, tug of war, that you're doing. Sometimes in your life, you just have competing interests, and you have to figure it out. She was a single woman. She was making a good living. She was traveling and meeting interesting people. One of the things that was most surprising to me was, she would just, go play golf with Bing Crosby. You know what I'm saying? Like,
there's no problem. Yeah.
It was just so extraordinary, and she She was friends with Bob Hope and his wife, Dolores. She stayed at their house. You know, she met Clark Gable, and it's just kind of endless, all that, you know, kind of, if you ever saw the movie Forrest Gump, or certainly read the book, you know, there are all those Forrest Gump moments where he has all these brushes with celebrity. And I just, as I was writing it, I was just like, oh my gosh, she had Forrest Gump moments, only they were real, you know?
No, they're just going to play golf with so-and-so, you know, the president, whoever, it doesn't matter, anybody.
She met the King of England, who had abdicated the crown in 1936, you know, when he wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, a divorcee from the United States. And, you know, so she met him, you know, before all of this happened. He abdicated the crown in December of 1936. It was earlier in 36 where she met him, and then she would meet him later. He and his wife, because they were sort of banished, I guess, by the British monarchy and the government to the Bahamas. You know,
so she went to the Bahamas and hung out with.
So she competed there. She, you know, there was an annual really tournament in Mexico, the Mexico Amateur. So she competed in that. I believe she won that one year. There was the Canadian Open, you know, beyond going over to compete in Europe for the Curtis Cup. So yeah, lots of unique Forrest Gump moments.